Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Welcome back to the B2C Lead Gen Podcast. My name is Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 48, How to Build a Brilliant Value Exchange Program. And joining us back on the show today after his brief cameo at PR Live is George Collins from Leeds Navigator. Welcome back, George.
Hi, how you doing? Good to see you guys again.
Good to see you too. I say, last time we saw you was at the PR Live, and I wasn't involved in that one because the sound was a bit of an issue. But it was, I think we were it was like a false dawn. We were celebrating being out, talking to each other, hugging each other, and then very quickly, I feel like things have unwound slightly. But back in that show, we talked about Leeds Navigator in a kind of a broader sense, and talked about PR Live in general and that kind of stuff. But today there's one bit of that show, the value exchange element, which we thought was really interesting, and we said let's get you back and let's focus in on that a little bit and answer that question of how do you build a brilliant value exchange program. So to kick us off, George, could you just I know it's a bit simple, but could you just clarify what we mean by value exchange?
Yeah, sure. So when we look to engage with consumers, what we're essentially asking them to do is exchange their personal details, so that we can call them or send them some information as follow-up as part of a buying journey. And so value in that sense is if you give us your details, we're going to give you something in exchange for that. So it might be some high quality content, downloadable content specific to their needs, or it might be a physical item. And typically organizations may use something like a pin badge or a tote bag or something like that as the piece of value. So in simple terms, that is the exchange. Your details, knowing that you're going to receive a phone call, and as a way of saying thank you for that, we'll give you a piece of value. Where in terms of their from a wider sense, where that fits in is we've got something that we refer to as the consumer journey, which is essentially a series of mini conversions to increase somebody's intent or someone's engagement with a particular brand or organization. And so the value journey, therefore, is how we start somebody from a cold relationship and in incremental stages start to build the value, start to nurture the relationship over time. And so there's also another sense of value in there from an organizational perspective, from a lead buyer perspective, from a client perspective, in terms of the type of value that they're getting out of consumers.
So would these be leads that are generated by a third party that might not have, they're obviously opted in, but they might not be like brand specific or something, and then you'll take them on this journey and the incremental sort of value journey where they're giving more and more details and getting more and more used to the product?
Yeah, precisely. So we may know that we're trying to get them to this point. In charity terms, that might be to a legacy giver. From a commercial perspective, it might be the kind of gold, platinum standard product. But in order to get them from cold, they don't know and they don't care about your organization, then they don't want to be sold to. They've got no inclination to have awareness about your organization. How do we get them from that point to that point without just having a kind of a spray and pray approach to calling data? That's how we do it. So we're taking them on the journey, precisely that. And in terms of the type of data, yeah, it's cold. So ideally, they shouldn't know your organization. That's where the kind of greatest amount of value, I think, comes for organizations who are buying this type of data. It's more expensive than other type of data because there's more to it. But generally speaking, it's collected via digital means, usually Facebook. Facebook is at the core of everything that we do at Navigator. And so for us, it's very much Facebook. And then, that's where we engage with them. And then we take the individual on the journey.
Just quickly, what does that journey look like in terms of percentages? So when it starts like 100% cold, and then what sort of ends as this legacy giver? What does legacy giver mean? Is that long-term donor? Or?
So a legacy giver is, I'm going to use another industry term, which I said I wouldn't, which is a gifts in will. So when somebody dies, they leave their estate or a portion of their estate to a charity,
Right.
and ultimately, that's the kind of that's what we're all working towards. Essentially, is having that kind of relationship with a consumer where they feel they feel empowered to leave something to charity. It's like that's the best kind of relationship.
Wow. Yeah,
So
I didn't realize it was that long and deep. So it sounds a bit of a strange euphemism, but I didn't realize it was that. Yeah, went that far. So you're right. The amount of sort of nurturing that would take is huge then, because they've really got to be invested in the brand, right?
And I think we have to be careful not to sound really crass. We're not kind of lead generating for death, but it's from a charitable income perspective, it's really key, and you need to get yourself aligned correctly, and that's one type of product. I'm also heavily invested within the lottery sector, the charitable lottery sector. And likewise, in order to engage people who might want to support charity through incentivized giving, this is another way of generating support or regular giving. So a monthly donation, for example, to take somebody from cold, they don't know who you are, they have no reason to care about who you are, and then you're asking them for 10, 20, 50 pounds a month. That's quite a step. And things like platforms like Facebook allow you to do that. But it's if you want sustainability and scale, you can't rely on kind of lazy marketing, which is what that is. Like here's something, does it catch your interest? Buy it. And that's why we're kind of elongating the journey. Mini conversions, engagement grows, trust grows, awareness grows about the brand, and the consumer's in a good spot to want to give for or buy a product for a long time.
Do you know the cold point? Sorry to just go back to this. Is that from seeing the ad, or is that from actual data collection?
So cold is, cold is defined really. So from an interests perspective on Facebook, it would be the individual has some kind of affinity with the organisation. They sit from an interest perspective or a behavioural perspective. They sit within groups that look like people who support those organisations or buy from those types of organisations if they're commercial. So to define what cold means, it means they have no relationship with that organisation as of today, and we're looking to change that.
Yeah, cool.
Well, one thing you sort of like half suggested there, which I want to kind of get to the bottom of, because maybe I've misinterpreted this. Almost like a level of exclusivity in the offer, in the sense you were saying things people are interested in, inherently other people won't be interested in. So in that sense, do you try and like qualify people by picking things that are only going to get certain people in?
Yeah, so like most other forms of lead gen, there's a funnel going on. So top of, middle of, bottom of funnel. And where we came into value, I'd said on the last chat we had that value exchange has been around forever, and it has. What we have found, in our opinion, what we found is that the value exchange campaigns are often quite broad. So it's a pin badge or it's a bag, and whether you want to support or engage with an organisation or not is almost irrelevant, because the bag's actually pretty handy. It looks cool, and I wouldn't mind one. Because I go shopping, and so the reason for engagement is not as clean. So our recipe on that is that we want to make the item really specific to the organisation, so it carries specific information, it's engaging, and it educates. Educate is a big one for us. It's you as a cold supporter, cold consumer are able to be part of this. There's a problem that we're trying to fix, or there's a product that we need you to buy, and by claiming this item, it will be relevant to you and it's relevant to us, and therefore we get off on the right pathway, essentially. So yeah, I think the bit around it being exclusive is more about relevancy. I think we know that we are funneling potential consumers by the product that we're offering, so that it's specific to the client.
Yeah, it makes complete sense, because obviously that builds awareness of the vertical and the brand and the
100%.
charity, if that's what it's relevant to. What so do you know, once you've collected the leads, they've moved from this sort of cold, but there's awareness, or they're in the right, they're what you call an ICP, like an ideal customer profile. The next step is they then become a lead, right? And that is that the point that the value exchange takes place initially. And then what happens? So then they either become a donor or don't. Do you, the thing with the sort of micro journey, do you, sorry, the micro moments within the journey, do you offer additional value exchange in like a next step beyond that as well, or?
Yeah, so we certainly can do, and it's a little bit dependent on what the end goal is, because it might be the value exchange could be something digital, so it could be a digital download, for example. When we talk about the journey, we don't use awareness, consideration, purchase. We use living, breathing, buying, and on the basis that it's not a linear journey. It's organic, and you go back and forward. And so, likewise, in terms of the micro moments, I like that term. The micro moments within the journey, sometimes they have to adapt and change. So, a vanilla campaign would be we're serving ads to a specific group. The product is relevant to them, and we know that based on their behavior profile and their interest profile. They claim the item, and they then become a lead at that point. That lead is then there's then an action taken on that, be it direct mail, phone call, email, etc. But there could be cases where we're supplementing other information or other send information within the journey to either provoke the individual taking a call, for example, or them wanting to get more information so it's more relevant when the next action is taken. So an example of that would be to use the telephone as the kind of medium from a next action perspective. Invariably, consumers will claim an item, and they'll say, "Yes, please send it to me, and here are my address details, and I've opted in, and I'm very clear of what's going what the next stage is." But then we're then unable to contact them, and so there might be other stages of value or other stages of information that we then provide in that gap, so that we can have a chat to them.
Yeah, makes sense.
The term value, just to kind of bring it back around, is I guess it's like quite a broad spectrum of what that can be. So within that spectrum, how do you kind of measure and identify that perfect point where what the outlay is not too great, but then you're getting sort of the reward from it?
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty big question, I think, and I'll try and be as succinct as I can on that one. I think so from a lead generation, a lead costing perspective, value exchange is definitely more expensive. Can be 3, 4, 5 times more expensive than just buying leads that have low intent. And so there's an inherent value added to a lead that knows about your organization, knows the products you're going to call them about, knows that they're going to be receiving a phone call, and arguably when it's going to be in the next 24 hours. There's an inherent value there that isn't that can't necessarily at early stages be coded or understood what that value is. But from a kind of a projection perspective, we've got this with process we go through called ROI before you buy, and so we're looking at a worst expected and best case on every outcome. And so actually you can calculate what the value of that lead is to your organization, because with GDPR, legitimate interest, the permission rate of the data afterwards, it might be that you're engaging that consumer on a particular offer or a particular product now, and they may take that, they may not. But if they don't, or even if they do, they may then also go on to buy other services or engage with other products. Good example of that is we always put a thank you card into physical packs that we send out. It's super simple, and it's a really nice way of just in a very plain and simple way saying thank you very much for supporting us, even if this is what you do, all that you do with us. You've helped lift the awareness of our brand. but they'll often then go onto the web shop and buy something. And you can put a discount code in there, you can track the code, and you can see that the lifetime value is then increased incrementally at that point. So value is a big point. That's totally from a kind of lead buyer and client perspective. The value from a supporter or a consumer is then almost a different conversation, because we don't want them to just be claiming a bag because it's useful. We want them to be claiming something relevant because it's impactful and it educates them.
Is the conversion rate measured of like value exchange versus like straight lead gen?
Yeah, I mean, so we've got, I think it's 11 or 12 different measures that we have throughout the journey, from collecting the data, cost per thousand, all the way through to conversion from lead, conversion from click, and kind of all the way through. That conversion rate differs per organisation, but there are definite stages that you have a great deal of control over in terms of how quickly an individual goes through a journey, or what type of information they're downloading or claiming. So yeah, from a conversion perspective, we on a kind of, again, a sort of vanilla campaign, we'd expect a 15% conversion of the good leads that come through, and that's pretty robust. Like anything, our stance on this is that we can't build something that's absolutely perfect at the beginning. So better never stops is one of our values, and it's let's get into the market, try the offer, take the benchmark and take the experience of what we've done across a number of different campaigns, make a start, and then grow by 1 or 5% each time over and over. We've seen a really nice gradual increase in conversion rate or contact rate, penetration rate of the data over campaign to campaign.
I wouldn't mind seeing your value playbook. You've mentioned them a few times. There's some good stuff in there, I think. Send it me.
I mean, it's open source. I mean, we've got. You can tell that we've just been through a branding exercise, because I'm talking about our values a lot, but slightly tongue in cheek. Genuinely, we do live by the values. But we've got this value called Triple Win, which is basically, yes, it's about the client, yes, it's about the consumer, but it's also about us as well. And we've always been in a position where we've been kind of open book with what we do. We're happy to share what we do on the basis that if someone else does it and optimizes it and does it better, we have to then keep up with them, and then we can be out in front of them, and it kind of snowballs. So we're certainly happy to share what we've got with you guys.
And do you know, when you work with a new client, so you do the value exchange, so you'll put together a sort of program where you're saying, we're going to go after this sort of target audience, this is the proposition we're going to give them. What part does the client take in that? Because obviously they're going to want to know, well, what will this person receive and how is it relevant to us? But also, when a lead then comes in, let's imagine it's going to a call center because it's like a uncontrollable contact from your side. Does the agent know what this program has been, and can they reference it as part of like the value exchange, so they can talk about what the person's just received or the offer or whatever else?
Yeah. So again, it will sort of depend on the client and the product and things. Generally speaking, so where we kind of came from, we always started with being really kind of, here are 5 or 6 different options for every single stage. And although the clients, I think, appreciated that at first, what we were doing is we were loading a load of complexity into the journey, which was then also, I think, kind of felt within the consumer journey. So one of our own optimizations is lessening that. We know what works. We've got a really good recipe. Let's start there. And sometimes that's we're doing this with you guys at the moment, where we started with a client on a single data entry landing page, and we know that we want to do 2 or 3 different things around increasing the level of intent of a consumer. So we're now adding in multiple stages. So rather than saying to the client, you can have 1 stage or multiple stages, we start with 1 page, we see how that works, run that for 1 or 2 campaigns, then we move to a multiple stage. and it goes on. So that's the kind of, in terms of level of input. We're although Value Exchange has been around forever, it's still kind of new, and it's one of those. I think it's one of those classic products, and it's almost like I think where Facebook is a little bit now, where people have tried it in the past, and it's been all right. The performance has been okay. We might look at it again in the future, and it's kind of one of those products. And so we feel like we've refreshed it. We're getting better results than clients did previously who used it, and for the clients who haven't used it, then it's a viable channel. And so it's kind of it's quite interesting from that perspective. But I think their level of input, therefore, I think they're waiting for us to, they being our clients, are kind of looking for some hand holding. From a dialer perspective, to use the telephone example for the second part of the question, which is yes, absolutely, they're aware of the campaign, the client, the product, where the leads have come from, what happens at the next stage, and that bit is absolutely key. All we're doing is we're getting the right type of people, making sure the data is absolutely clean. To use your phraseology, that the data represents a human, so that when the telephone agency gets that data, they're having a really good conversation, and so they need to be able to know how to answer questions about it. So we invest time in scripting, invest time in training, etc. One of the other things we've tried in the past is adding in kind of qualification questions. So from a lottery perspective, if you won the jackpot, what would you spend your money on? 4 or 5 options, and then the dialer can say, "Oh, I can see if you won the money, you would buy a X, Y, and Z."
Yeah, you don't want to leave that to free choice, right?
Yeah, quite. And we've had some interesting results that have come out of that, and I think that's one of the things that we're still looking at how relevant that is. But just to make the point that everything that goes on at the front end, the person who's actually doing the real hard graft knows what's kind of come before and what's going to happen after.
I think one of the things that you mentioned with the value proposition is, and something that I think, as you mentioned, it's gone on previously, but what I think has happened in the past is it's never been associated to the actual brand or the company doing it. I think, a lot of times you call them something else, which is incentives. And so people running lead gen have always had like a potential issue with an incentive, because they'll go like, well, the lead, what are they actually interested in? Do they want our product or service, or do they want this thing? And I think that's why having it attached to the brand in some way, or relevant to the vertical or something, I think it does 2 things. It actually potentially qualifies the user in a way, rather than it be, win 100 grand, whatever. I mean, take the lottery thing out of it, because that is the incentive.
But just on that point, we don't position lottery at the front end. It's right. About the item. Yeah. And so your point's right. They have pre-qualified themselves, and it just so happens that in this particular pathway, that in lottery is then introduced, or another product in a commercial sense is then introduced. So yeah, definitely.
I think it's an issue they've had in the past with like co-reg, where someone's come in and it's like, I don't know, win a Ferrari or something, and then the first question has been, they've then done like co-sponsor and sold it to like mobile phones, but again, like, and they'll go, "Oh, I thought are you ringing about the Ferrari?" And they're like, "No, I want to try and sell you a mobile phone." But imagine this, the incentive is more like, I don't know, get a SIM card so that you can do X with it. And that that becomes like a value exchange that's relevant to the product, and you could even like incentivize it with the product. Very few companies do that, because they're not necessarily working with those courage companies directly. But while I've seen it, we've done it in the past before with energy, where we do like win your energy, paid for a year, and then the first question, like as part of the competition or the value exchange, was how do you pay your energy? And so it associated that immediately with this thing of winning it, and then they come in and answer a bunch of other questions. But the conversion rates were massive compared to it not being associated to that competition. You could like measure it directly.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. I think some of it is also kind of psychology as well. So from a buying perspective, why are we going to pay 60 or 70% more per lead? We need volume. Which is another conversation that I know that you guys talk about. But actually, looking at quality over quantity, and the type of conversation you can have. The other psychology bit is the I alluded to it a moment ago, which is around the value of a lead. So whether the consumer purchases now or not, there's still an intrinsic value to that lead because they're a real person, they're interested in your brand, they've demonstrated that because they've claimed an item, they've made a or two or three or four mini conversions, and so there is a value to that. So I think it's definitely how the lead generation is kind of looked at and perceived.
We're going to steal that micro moments. What was the other one that we?
That's good.
We stole
micro branding.
Micro branding. That's what we call it.
Micro stuff going on.
But yeah.
Remember micro machines? Those little cars. Anyway.
Just quickly on the point around the brand, what we haven't done yet is looked at brand lift. So in the marketing advertising arena, the term incrementality is used a lot. Do something here, and there are actions that are taken elsewhere. We've definitely seen, and we're kind of tying some data down at the moment on a couple of clients where we've seen the action from value exchange has led to X, Y, and Z. And I think the bridge, we need to create a bridge around kind of like identifying what that lift is. Sorry.
Yeah, we've spoken about it before when we were looking at stuff like like native, where they have advertorials, and let's say, I don't know, 90% of the people that click the advertorial don't then actually become a lead. They've just read the advertorial. But the amount of information they've just absorbed, either around that particular company or that vertical, number one, you've got the opportunity with that individual at some point in time, and they have either been exposed to a brand and might then go directly. It's really funny. It's something that in B2B is now being termed dark social, and we've never really coined a phrase for it, I don't think, in other than branding maybe in B2C. But it's this idea that all what happens outside of the arena of lead gen, where it's like, everything's measured, is actually where a lot of this stuff is taking part, and some of it cannot be measured because of the very nature of it. But someone takes part in like a micro moment and is exposed to a brand. A week later, they're in a shop and just speaking to someone that happens to mention that brand, and the only way that's happened because of the exposure they've had at that moment. And nobody ever, we've spoken about this loads, where no one ever measures it. No one measures all the ads that come in with lead gen. And the thing is, if the brand is associated with it, or the vertical even, that's just like 100% free for the brand or the vertical, because most of the people running the lead gen are all getting paid on a CPL, right? Then they're doing it all at the coal face. It's all being paid on a CPC, CPM, whatever. And I think, it's one of these things where companies spend billions every year really badly on programmatic ads, through massive exchanges. It never works. And the way they judge the success of it is on clicks or amount of people, eyeballs. You get the same thing with lead gen. It's just that you're measuring leads or sales on the back end of it. But the thing is, and this is why you find lead generators never run on shitty places that don't perform, because you can't afford to do it.
100%. Vanity versus sanity is what that is, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
You can create noise very, very easily, and you can make yourself feel good really, really quickly. But it doesn't account to sales. I think the other bit that you're mentioning there around the engagement piece, I think is also, we're talking about digital, and we've got a very digital agenda, but also even from a face-to-face perspective, if you think the wasted conversations that I had because the individual is incentivized on making a sale on the street, at a door, in a supermarket, whereas actually there is a degree of lead generation or value exchange that could happen as part of that conversation. It's not just about the financial, because if you take people on a journey, that's how marketing has evolved. But kind of over the last 5 years or so, we've become seemingly quite lazy in terms of, it's just, I have to have a conversation, I have to make a sale to you now, and if I don't make a sale, move aside, I need to talk to the next person. And I think that's on channels over, really.
And that's why you end up with 90% of the leads that don't ever convert just get left behind, and no one ever does anything with them. At best, they have a junior marketer sat sending cat memes or something to them, or pictures of Halloween in the office or something.
I mean, and it's like, why? Yeah. It's like, you look at the open rate, but it's not making any sales. So
yeah.
So, I mean, we've touched on quite a bit there. We've gone all over the shop as we tend to do on this podcast, sort of meander in different directions. So what I'm going to do to bring this back around and to answer the question, how to build a brilliant value exchange program, I'm going to press you slightly, George, put you on the spot here. Feel free to ignore me, but I'll at least attempt to have some structure. So people listening who want to build a value exchange program, and you can approach that either from the perspective of a brand or from someone who wants to do it in your sense, I'll leave it up to you. To wrap things up, can I get some tips from you? Just repeat things we already said, but just important things to consider, some valuable tips people listening can sort of take on board and end with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'll condense my thinking now. So there's a couple of things about the campaign itself. So I'll start kind of in the middle, which is around engagement. So from our perspective, the campaign, the physical item, the piece of value that's being exchanged has to be genuinely interesting. If it's broad and pin badgy or tote baggy, our opinion is that you're nurturing or you're garnering the wrong kind of relationship. So engagement, make it engaging, and it needs to be engaging to new audiences. We're massively focused on growth and new relationships for our clients, new consumers, and so it has to appeal to brand new audiences. The other one is experience. So kind of thinking about how difficult is it for the individual to engage with it? Do they get it? Is it interesting? Which is kind of the engagement bit. But then the actual journey they have to go on. If it's massively complex, they're probably going to fall out of love with it quite quickly. And because we're dealing with cold audiences, it needs to just be simple. Education is the third one. So I mentioned this earlier. It needs to educate the consumer as well, whether they become a lead, whether they become a sale or not. We are trying to use this also as a brand awareness piece. So if the item or the value exchange can educate, then they are part of the solution. Whether they choose to be part of the solution in a monetary way now or later, that will remain to be seen. And then the last one is in the level of intent. So we massively believe in this whole data should represent a human. We massively buy into that. We peddle it as our own in many cases, but that level of intent, if you understand the individual, you can increase the level of intent of a consumer, and therefore when they receive a phone call or they receive an ask or they receive a request for a sale, it shouldn't be a surprise. And I think if you can take those points, engagement, experience, education, intent, if you can take those elements, you've got the smattering of a pretty strong value exchange program. I think the other bits left and right are have good kit, make sure it's transparent, make sure it's compliant, work with suppliers who have got good creds and they can provide benchmarks and references and all those sorts of things. But that's no-brainer stuff. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, that
was brilliant.
That's a brilliant way actually to sum it up, and I think it's helpful because I say it's our fault. We tend to just wander all over the shop on here, but it's nicer to bring it back around. I think people listening, that's a really strong way to finish this because I think it perfectly gets people started on this program. So thanks so much, George, for coming back to us via Zoom this time, and I'm pleased that hopefully last time my fault, but the sound quality was awful. So it's nice to actually.
Yeah, we can hear you now. I could hear you last time, but no one else could. So
apparently you were actually speaking, Simon. I mean,
exactly. Well, the problem is having a very apparently my voice very deep. We actually have to adjust the bass on it. So in something like that arena, you just can't hear it at all. It's just like a low rumble.
I mean, there was 1,000 people in that room, so sound quality, I think was pretty good. I think I could hear. So
cool.
So good to see you guys.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, George. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation podcast. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.